Pay close attention. The news you're about to see is fulfilling Bible prophecy.
Welcome to another edition of YPN News, bringing you the news that relates to Bible prophecy and foretold by Yisrael Hawkins. Katan, in the news today, we're going to talk about NATO. NATO is expanding their reach, now offering the country of India to join in with a few catches. We'll have those details. Also, while they're making those plans, they're getting ready to have 26 countries involved in the biggest NATO military exercise ever. And also, we're going to talk about Putin. Here, he says he's going to avenge the death of one of his generals that took place over there in Ukraine, in the Ukraine war. So we'll have those details as well. But first, we have another food recall. The FDA has recalled some frozen strawberries, mixed fruits, and smoothie blends that have been linked to a hepatitis A outbreak. Now, the outbreak has caused at least 9 people to become sick. The recall products are sold in dozens of states at Walmart, Costco, and H-E-B stores under the brand names Great Value and Raider Farms. Now, if you have any of these products containing the frozen strawberries, you should either throw them out or return them to the store for a refund.
Yeah, scary. Well, shifting to the world theater, China has a lot to say when it comes to NATO making alliances with Asian countries. NATO's focus has been European countries for many years, but now have made ties with several countries in the Indo-Pacific region. China is concerned NATO is pushing too far east. Well, please listen as Indian journalist Palki Sharma explains on her show Vantage why China is not pleased with NATO's advances in their neighborhood.
Is NATO coming to Asia? It's a question that many countries in the region are asking. Some say NATO is already here. They have partners in the Indo-Pacific. They're also opening an office in Japan. But what does NATO's Asian pivot mean? China is clearly unhappy about it. The defense minister made that clear at the Shangri-La Dialogue. It's an annual security conference held in Singapore, like we just told you. All major powers attended. China's defense minister lashed out at NATO's Asian pivot. He said all such alliances will plunge the region into chaos. Listen to this.
In essence, attempts to push for NATO-like alliances in the Asia-Pacific are a way of kidnapping regional countries and exaggerating conflicts and confrontations, which will only plunge the Asia-Pacific into a vortex of disputes and conflicts.
Which alliances is he talking about? You have security groupings like the AUKUS and the Five Eyes Alliance. You also have more dynamic ones like the Quad. China opposes all of them. It says this is an attempt to contain Beijing's influence. Just one problem, though. These alliances did not appear out of thin air. They are a direct response to Chinese expansionism. Look at the partner countries. India is a member of the Quad. Philippines recently held 4-way talks with the US, Japan, and Australia. These are not Western countries. These are Asian nations, fed up with Chinese belligerence. A free and open Indo-Pacific is in their interest as well. The only question is how to achieve that. Should NATO be imported into Asia? There are indications of such an attempt, not to recruit Asian members, but to create a wider community. And India figures prominently in that plan. US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin is in New Delhi. His visit comes weeks ahead of Prime Minister Modi's US trip. He's already met Defense Minister Rajnath Singh. Security cooperation topped the agenda. Talks are on to share fighter jet engine technology with India. New Delhi is also planning to buy 30 drones from the US. The deal is worth around $3 billion. It is consistent with India's long-term defense policy. Diversify purchases, build up local capabilities. But the US has something even bigger in mind. This is NATO Plus. Now, some quick facts. NATO Plus is an extended community of NATO. Right now, there are 5 members: Japan, South Korea, Australia, Israel, and New Zealand. How is this different from NATO? For starters, these countries are not Atlantic. They're Indo-Pacific and West Asian. But more importantly, there is no Article 5. Article 5 is the rule of collective defense. It does not apply to NATO Plus, and it's honestly a raw deal. You get all the responsibilities, but none of the protection. Then why bother joining it? NATO Plus offers easy intelligence sharing. It will also make military procurement easier. Say you want an American F-16 or an F-22. If you're part of NATO Plus, you could get a good deal. A U.S. House panel wants India to be included in this setup, in NATO Plus. It's a panel that deals with China. It has the support of both Democrats and Republicans. But how should India see this offer? With a lot of apprehension. NATO Plus may not be a treaty alliance, but it's a clear sign of picking sides. If India joins NATO Plus, it would limit New Delhi's strategic autonomy. No more warm ties with Russia. Definitely no defense trade. Plus, India's relationship with the US is very different from other NATO Plus members. Australia and New Zealand fought 2 world wars on America's side. Japan and South Korea are treaty allies. Israel and the US share a special relationship, but India-US ties are very different from all of these. These warm exchanges are a recent phenomenon. Washington spent most of the last 70 years criticizing and sanctioning India, so New Delhi must be wary. It cannot become a pawn for NATO's new rivalry with China. The alliance is famous for its use and throw tactics. So the China challenge must be met on India's terms, which means no to alliance and yes to engagement. Even the US seems to be testing the waters right now. This NATO Plus idea was proposed by a US panel. It has not been officially offered by the US government. Seems like Washington was sending out feelers, trying to see what the reaction will be. So far, it's been tepid. NATO Plus comes with a lot of baggage, commitments, and demands. India would do well to steer clear.
India would do well to steer clear. Now, Ketan, if India does decide to join this NATO Plus, of course, they're not going to have the protection of NATO, so it comes with it's not the whole NATO package, if you would, but they're also going to jeopardize their relations with Russia and China should they join this NATO Plus.
That's right.
Well, in an air exercise of enormous proportions, 25 NATO countries are coming together over Germany's airspace to drill what they would do if attacked by Eastern nations. Now, military officials deny the drills are taking place to send a message to anyone. German Air Force Chief Ingo Gerhards told news reporters, quote, "This exercise is not a signal directed at anyone. It's a signal to ourselves, to NATO itself, because it's mostly NATO nations participating under German command. A signal that we can defend this country and this alliance," end quote.
Well, the exercise comes as no surprise. It was planned since 2018, shortly after Russia annexed Crimea. But now officials say the need for the drill is more urgent since the invasion into Ukraine. This exercise will use more aircraft from more nations than ever used before. German Air Force Major Soren L. explains the country, or the enormity, of the situation to Al Jazeera. He said, quote, "That is a big challenge for all of the nations coming to Germany. For example, the United States is a country which is furthest away, had a lot of challenges to bring all their aircraft, all their material to the Atlantic Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean.
Can imagine moving it all over just for the drills to take place. Well, this will be quite an unusual sight for German skies. For several hours every day of the 10-day drill, 3 busy commercial flight zones will close for the military aircraft to use the German airspace. Now, this will most likely cause flight disruptions and delays for the average passenger.
Well, even though officials have stressed the hypothetical enemy of these drills is not Russia, but it's hard for everyone to believe that as NATO gears up to flex its muscles while the Ukrainian war rages on. Some of the F-16s flying in the drill will then be sent to the Ukrainian government, and its pilots will be given lessons on how to fly the American-made fighter jets.
Well, when asked if they had any concerns with the drills taking place now, one U.S. Air Force Sergeant Jada Medley had this to say, quote, "For me, I believe it's a great opportunity for unity," she said. "Even though we understand there is a lot happening within the European theaters, the Air Defender exercise has nothing to do with what is happening in Ukraine currently. We are just strengthening our partnerships as well as being good allies, end quote.
Well, Russia has threatened to target U.S. F-16s if they are sent to Ukraine. In his economic forum, Putin said that Russia remains strong despite international sanctions. And at the address in St. Petersburg, Putin delivered two messages, one to his people and one to the world. He said, quote, "We see that the West is doing all it can so that Russia suffers a strategic defeat on the battlefield. But soon, Ukraine will stop using its own military hardware altogether. There's nothing left."
Well, he continued, "Everything they have is brought in from abroad, and you can't fight like that for long. Their tanks are burning, and several tanks have been destroyed, including Leopards, and the F-16s will also burn. I have no doubt," he said. Now, that statement was met with a round of applause by those in attendance at the summit.
That's right. Putin also addressed how Moscow will look at targeting F-16s, those American-made ones that are going to be sent over to Ukraine, and their hardware, even if they're stationed outside Ukraine, but used in the battle operations against Russia. World leaders now, of course, used to flock in droves to Russia's flagship economic forum, but now because of the war, they are staying away. Even journalists from what Russia has labeled unfriendly countries have been banned from attending the economic forum as the relations between Russia and the West grow worse. And this, of course, is a first for Russia to actually ban journalists from other countries.
Well, Andrei Kolinskikov of the Carnegie Endowment said of President Putin, quote, "He's concerned and he doesn't have a visible exit for himself. And because of that, he has to continue this war until the end." Well, what does it mean? End or victory? Nobody knows.
Well, some may say after more than 2 decades in power, Putin has become used to winning, and the possibility of defeat, well, he will find hard to accept.
Well, how close are we to nuclear weapons being used in Russia's war with Ukraine? Well, Russia is making the threat to avenge a general killed in a Ukraine missile strike in the Zaporizhia region. Now take a look at this next video to see why Putin is making such a threat to use depleted uranium weapons and his message to the U.S. about a potential third world war. Take a look.
Our cover story is about the ultimate danger, the Ukraine war going nuclear. Now, this is not an idle threat or bravado by a maverick commander. This actually was a threat that's been made by Vladimir Putin himself. On Tuesday, he issued a clear and unambiguous ultimatum that Russia would use depleted uranium weapons on the battlefield. Why? To avenge the death of one of his top generals. His name was Sergei Goryachev, a major general in the Russian military and the chief of staff of the 35th Combined Arms Army. On Tuesday, he was reportedly killed in a Ukrainian missile strike during Kiev's counteroffensive in the Zaporizhia region, and reports say the strike was carried out using British-supplied Storm Shadow missiles. The 52-year-old general was a highly decorated officer. He fought in the Second Chechen War, commanded a tank brigade, also oversaw a Russian base in Tajikistan, and led Russian forces in Moldova. Now, he was one of the Russian president's best commanders, and his death is a major blow for the Kremlin. You see, Putin will not let this wound to Russia's military ego go unanswered. Now, have a look at this report. On the same day Sergei Goryachev died, the Russian president issued this warning. He said that Moscow could use weapons with depleted uranium in Ukraine. He also issued a direct ultimatum to the West, warning that there could be no end to the war in Ukraine. He said, and I'm quoting from his statement, "The United States pretends not to be afraid of an escalation of the conflict in Ukraine. But sane people, they clearly do not want to take this to a third world war. In the event of a third world war, there will be no winners, including America." Now, you see, this marks a big turning point in this war, one that could make it more dangerous. Depleted uranium is a dense byproduct that is left over when uranium is enriched for use in nuclear reactors or nuclear weapons. In fact, it retains some radioactive properties, but cannot generate a nuclear reaction like a nuclear weapon would. But it is still very dangerous. Now, according to experts, depleted uranium mainly emits alpha particle radiation. Alpha particles don't have enough energy to go through one's skin, but if they are ingested or inhaled, they could be a serious health hazard. In fact, it can also be used for tank armor and bullets due to its high intensity, through which it can penetrate enemy armored vehicles. In other words, depleted uranium is mildly radioactive, but the radiation could spread terror, and once it lands on the battlefield, it will invite escalation. And there's no saying what could follow next. Is the general's death the only reason Putin would deploy such a weapon? Well, not really. There are other factors involved as well. It's also because Ukraine is getting them too. Reports say the UK is planning to supply depleted uranium shells to Ukraine's armed forces. And the US also is set to approve depleted uranium tank rounds for Ukraine. So Putin has more than one reason to be the first to use these weapons. And as the stakes increase, so will the costs. The money to fund the deployment of these weapons. Russian coffers are already drained. The war has been underway for a year. To shore up the coffers, Putin has hit oligarchs with $5.3 billion war tax. The proposed levy was outlined in a bill introduced on Tuesday. And under this bill, Russian businesses making profits of over 1 billion rubles a year will have to pay a one-off tax worth up to 10% of their total gains. And through this bill, Moscow plans to raise an estimated 3 billion rubles from its oligarchs. Russian media reports are claiming that the oligarchs themselves came up with the idea. Why did they do this? Because they realized they have made gigantic profits during the course of this war. So it's a win-win deal for both the sides. The Ukraine war, in fact, has already become a testing ground for the most modern and sophisticated weaponry on both sides. And Russia has claimed its first kill by artificial intelligence. You heard that right. Reports say its highly acclaimed S-350 Vityaz air defense system shot down a Ukrainian aircraft while operating in auto mode. This is an extraordinary feat, an aircraft destroying another without any operator intervention. And this marks the first instance where a system operated completely automatically used artificial intelligence for combat. But the question is, will Putin succeed in the larger war in turning the much-hyped Ukraine counteroffensive into minor gains while the world tries anxiously to find a route map towards negotiations that result in a ceasefire, if not in the end of war? The jury is open, but this is clear. This much is clear. Both sides are in a hard slog, and the only thing that is clear at this point is that the price will be paid in blood, not only by generals, but by thousands upon thousands of ordinary soldiers.
Well, although many probably don't agree with Putin's threat to use depleted uranium, one thing he did get right is that if there is a third world war and nuclear weapons are used, there will be no winners. Yes, including the United States, but that applies to Russia and anybody else that's involved in it.
All right, there's been a lot of talk about the use of nuclear weapons, but, you know, as all these situations build, at some point, and here, you know, President Putin is saying he's not afraid, you know, to avenge the death of the general. So at some point, these nuclear weapons are going to be used.
Yes, and as we continue to see the West make its expanse around many countries, first Russia, now China's becoming a little concerned because now they're getting into the Indo-Pacific region with NATO wanting to make alliances with that. And let's not forget that India is a part of the BRICS currency
That's right.
system. So, we don't know how that's going to work out for them. And if they do go ahead and join with NATO, many countries are becoming up on edge because they feel like they're becoming enclosed, kind of like, an animal backed into the corner. So the only option that they can see in their mind is to lash out and attack.
Right, pushing outward, like Russia recently moving some of his missiles there in the Belarus area, and which was not something that has been done before, but actually taking some of those nuclear warheads and moving them to Belarus. So if you'd like to find out more about these stories, contact the House of Yahweh. And when you do, don't forget to request your free copy of the monthly newsletter and Prophetic Word magazine. Here's how.
To contact the House of Yahweh, you can write them at the House of Yahweh at P.O. Box 2498, Abilene, Texas 79604. You can call them at 1-800-613-9494. You can visit them on any of their websites by going to Yahweh.com, YisraelHawkins.com, and Yahweh'sBranch.com. You can also visit them by going to YPNnews.com. For all calls outside the United States, please dial the number on your screen. And don't forget, the Israel Says and Ask Israel program, you can find those by going to YisraelSays.com and AskIsrael.com. Well, stay with us because up next is another classic message from Yisrael Hawkins. From all of us here at YPN News, I'm Katan Alexander.
And I'm Jeffrey Heimerman.
Thank you for watching.